How are you all feeling? Are you excited? The award ceremony is to follow. I am, I'm excited. And I'll tell you one of the reasons that I'm excited. I'm going to share something with you. I've been waiting 3 days to give this keynote. And the keynote has been about 11 years in the writing, because it's basically a lot of stories based on my experience of working in several different companies. But the reason I'm really excited about this is because my therapist has told me that sharing some of the stories I'm about to tell you is good for my well-being. Would you like to hear some more? Yay, great, that's good news, that's good news. So I'm going to start probably about 7 years ago. I interviewed for a major financial services organisation in London. And I was excited to get the interview because it was a head of test role, my first proper job. And I had a good interview with the boss, right? And I found out quite a few things in the interview that were just dead interesting. I found out I'd have 7 direct reports, 5 of who were program test managers. I'd have a non-functional testing specialist who's here today, and I'd have an automation specialist as well. I thought, well, this is good. What a nice team. I was also a bit scared because I then found out we'd have a team size of around 240 testers distributed globally, and they were mainly supplied to us by 5 different system integrators, consultancy firms. And that was all good. And I was really excited about the role, and I couldn't believe it when the job offer came in. I thought, this is amazing, and it was Christmas. And so I was due to start in the early January of the next year. And I was sitting there enjoying my Christmas break. But in the back of my mind, the last words of the hiring manager kept on ringing in the back of my mind, pricking my conscience. He said, testing isn't in bad shape here, but it's not universally regarded as being valuable. He said, I don't know what the problems are, but I don't think it needs detonating. Now, those were his words. He then said, I don't know what the problems are, I need you to find out, and I need you to fix them. So I started on day 1, and I started talking to people in the organization. And it really felt like I was in at the deep end, I have to be honest with you. I was experienced, but not really prepared for the complexity of some of the challenges that I found we had to solve. What I found out is that one of my direct reports, one of the program test managers, was the previous head of test. And he had been encouraged to step down from the role to protect his well-being. I also found out that the other direct reports were really good people. I mean, they were great. I'm not exaggerating. They were a marvelous team. But they weren't so great. They were really good people. They were helpful. They were keen. They were qualified. They were certified. And they were there for me. And it was lovely. But they were unhappy, unconfident. They were frustrated. And to an extent, morale was quite low. What's going on here? So, that was interesting. I then started talking to people, and also found out that people in the broader technology division of the organization either had high expectations of testing, they needed information from testing, or they were experts in testing. Some of them, who had never even performed a day's testing in their life, were able to confidently describe the testing strategy that we should undertake. I was amazed at their innate understanding of our craft. I had met the stakeholders. This keynote talk is a collection of stories about what I found when talking to our stakeholders, what we did about it, and of course the results. So the way I propose we spend the next 45 minutes or so together is I'm going to share with you the importance of stakeholders and why the context of your organization is a significant factor. I also want to share with you what I call the problems of perception. What happens if you don't provide the right information to your stakeholders? What the impact of that can look like. After that, we'll spend a bit of time looking at the art of identifying and communicating with our stakeholders. I'll also give you some ideas about the things we could talk to them about. They're just ideas. And then finally, I want to share with you why I respect Deming, and to build on some of the narrative that Marek talked about yesterday, why it's good and valuable to use data to help tell stories to senior people. And we'll have time for questions. How does that sound? Yep, thumbs up, getting nods, great. So, yep, this is where we are. Good. So, just in terms of defining who these devilish little beasts are, the stakeholders, they are people who either have an interest in the outcomes of testing, they may have influence over testing, or they might use the information provided by testing. And these guys are really important because without stakeholders, we do not have a mandate to do testing. And that's because stakeholders really are the people who own the risks that we mitigate through our work. They often provide us with money and budget to buy things like environments or tools or to get people in to help us do our work. And when we think about risk and the way we mitigate risks, as we undertake our testing and we look at our test results, we uncover more product and project risks. And what that should do is make us a hub of information or a radiator of information to many different stakeholder groups. And for me, that makes testing an information business. But we've got to be really good at communicating that information to stakeholders. And it makes us a people and a communications business as well. So it's not just about being technical, it's about being communicative colleagues. And if we don't provide the right information to our stakeholders in a format which is helpful to them, and provide them with information that is valuable to them, then perceptions may become a problem about the work that we do. And in 2015, Bill Gates said this. It's a quote I lifted off the internet, and I don't know what the context was, but Bill said, "Your intentions don't matter. Perception is reality, and if people perceive you the wrong way, it doesn't matter what your intentions are." And what that means in the context of our talk today and the time we're spending together is that if you or your testing team are doing the best work possible to mitigate the risks that some of the stakeholders hold, and you are working in the most efficient way, in the most optimal way, and being as good at your craft as you can be, if they don't know what you're doing, they will make up their own stories about what you're doing, and the value that you provide is lost. So, context. I just want to talk about this because a number of factors determine who your stakeholders are, what they need from you, how you communicate with them, and what you talk to them about. And the factors are manifold. I've only listed about 6 or 7 here, but the third from bottom bullet point says and. And that's because there are a whole array of different factors that can influence this. But I'm going to spend a bit of time just talking about the first 3 of them. So the first one is about the size of the organization and its stage of growth. So I once moved from a medium-sized company that had a really strong quality management system in place. And I was used to being able to be very confident about releasing software that was not bug-free, but was relatively clean. And I moved to my first startup. Excuse me. And that startup company was delivering the first handheld trading systems for the futures and options market on global exchanges using emergent web technology and emergent hardware. So this is going back a long time. This is about 2001, 2002. And I was the first tester through the doors. And I'd made friends with the developers, and we worked out how we were going to get along together and release this brilliant, good quality working software. And I was testing the first release, and it was really quite buggy. And the more I tested, the more bugs I found, and the closer to the release day was coming, and there was just more and more bugs emerging. And I had a chat with the CIO. It was a very nice, friendly startup. In a small organisation like that, everyone knows everyone. So I caught him for a coffee, And I said, look, this software isn't good enough to go out the door, and it's not going to be ready. I don't think we should release it. And he said, are there any showstoppers in this software? And I said, no, there's plenty of high severity and plenty of mediums, and there's a lot of them, but there aren't any showstoppers. He said, if we release it, will we be sent to prison or sued for bad financial position management? I said, no, probably not. He said, the most important thing we need to do next week is get the traders on the trading floor using our handheld devices, being seen to be first to market, and let the traders trade in the pub and they can show their mates. That is the way our software and our solutions will get the maximum level of market penetration and will get to market first. He then said, I don't care if it works. Give me the known issues list. So I'm like, okay, that's an interesting thing for me. I learned about organizational size and different business drivers and how that influences what people think about quality. The second thing I'm just going to pick on here is who does the testing. I don't know how many people here work in organizations where you buy testing services in from suppliers. Could you put your hand up if you do? Have you got service providers who do some of the work for you? My gosh, it's not many. Okay, there's about sort of 15, 20 people, I think. If you work in that kind of organization, your stakeholders are going to include people like procurement. They're going to include people like service delivery managers, account managers, and customer service managers. And the inverse of this is if you work on the supply side of testing. So can I see a show of hands? Does anybody work as a consultant or work within a system integrator? That's a bit healthier. So you guys will get this. If you work on the supply side of testing, you will be faced with a massive variety of stakeholders, and their needs will change at any given moment depending on the state of delivery. And that's really quite difficult. So it pays to understand that and anticipate it. And the third thing I just want to touch on here is about regulated and non-regulated environments. So if you work in financial services or if you work in healthcare, you are regulated. Now, I spent some time working in a pharmaceutical and life sciences company, and we provided software and consultancy solutions to really big chemical companies, for example. And I kid you not, we spent probably a month a year purely engaging with the customers' audit teams. Because the customers' audit teams needed to be confident that we had a robust, clean, efficient development process and a very thorough testing process. So when they used our software in the labs to support drug discovery, our software wasn't going to introduce errors that made them produce drugs that didn't work, or worse, drugs that would actually harm people. So when you work in those sorts of environments, a lot of your stakeholders are external and they're very demanding. And if you look after them, you will sell your software. If you don't look after them, they won't buy it. So it's really important to understand the difference between regulated and non-regulated environments. And if you need to support your sales team by providing this information to auditors, then sales are a very, very keen stakeholder of yours as well. So I'm just trying to paint a picture here. Lots of different things influence who your stakeholders are and what they need. The point here is that there is no one-size-fits-all. I can't give you a blueprint or a template today that you can lift and shift and put into your company that helps you with stakeholder management. And in the rest of the talk, there are some slides that give you examples of things you can do. But they are just examples. They are illustrations. I've made stuff up to tell a story. The real things in here are the stories, however, because these things happen, and we'll share some of those now. So I did want to talk to you about what happens if you don't get good stakeholder engagement. And I wanted to go back to the financial services company that I was working for. And in my early days, I started talking to the technical operations team. And for those of you that work in smaller companies and don't have a tech ops department, they're the people that transition software from software development teams and put them into production and then run them. And if there are defects in the production versions of software or hardware, they're the ones that get the pager calls at 2 in the morning and you have a really hard time. So my early conversations with the service transition managers and the service delivery managers were awful. I'm going to use the words that I remember. They thought we were incompetent. They thought we were uncaring, and they accused us of working in isolation. And that really hurt, because I had got to know my team by then, and I could see that none of that was intentional. But the conversations I was having were highly emotive, they were angry, and they were not pulling any punches, describing to me what they thought about us. And it was really, really hard. It was a bit of a baptism of fire. So what could possibly go wrong? That's where we were at. This slide really starts to talk about what was going on. I'm going to unpack this a little bit. So it shows the perception that our stakeholders and operations had. It actually then shows the reality of what was happening under the surface in the teams. And it showed the reason why there was a perception problem and the things that we then needed to fix in order for our stakeholders to have confidence with us. Confidence in us. So they thought we were incompetent, but I knew, and I could prove, that we were actually highly effective at preventing defects from finding their way into the production environment. The reason they had that perception is because they experienced a few production defects every now and then. And that's all they remembered. They didn't have visibility of the other defects that didn't hit the production environment, so they only had a negative view of us. They thought we did exhaustive testing, and they wanted us to do exhaustive testing. They were quite demanding. But they didn't really understand that we work with technical, time, and financial constraints. And we couldn't do everything that they would want us to do, and arguably we shouldn't be doing that anyway. But the reason for that, again, was a lack of awareness. They didn't know how we worked, and as a result, they didn't trust us. The third thing was, because they thought we did exhaustive testing, they expected defect-free software. Now, we all know that you can't do that unless you work in the nuclear industry or NASA or somewhere like that. So we were always applying a risk-based approach to our testing strategies and to our testing efforts. But they were unhappy because they had a very different risk appetite. They wanted defect-free software. We wanted good enough software that we could deliver through an economical balance of the constraints I just talked about. And the point about them thinking we were uncaring, because there were defects, we thought we didn't care about the effort they took to run the operation system. But we did. My team were great. They were highly competent. They were professional, and I've got to say, they worked with a lot of pride. And so when we started talking about some of these things, it hurt them. But we needed to work out what we were going to do about it. So a bit later on in the talk, I will explain what we did about it and what the results were, but not right now. I just want to spend a bit of time sharing with you why negative stakeholder perceptions are actually damaging to teams. And it starts with the top left. If you get into this sort of situation, there's an erosion of trust and respect between stakeholders and teams who do delivery of work, not just testing teams, but other teams as well. And what that leads to is additional work. People start to say, why is it so expensive? Can you take me through the estimates? Why is it taking so long? Can you tell me about your processes? What testing strategies are you using on this portfolio of work? And how can we look at ways of making this more effective or quicker? And that sort of questions that lead to governance meetings are quite unhelpful and are to be avoided if possible, because servicing that activity and that rectification takes time. It takes time away from managers, it takes time away from people doing the work, when they should be focusing on delivery. And when that happens, you would like to think that the books are going to get balanced, where the testers will say, well, we've got to do this extra work, so we won't do as much testing, but that is never the case. So you do all of the testing work and do the additional work in supporting the governance questions. That makes people work long hours, it gives people burnout, and it's frustrating. The other thing that happens is that funding can become an issue. And that could be funding for the things that you need for doing the work, like environments or tools. But the thing I'm going to talk about now is about how the funding for people in your team, for their pay and their bonuses can be affected by this. So I'm going to flip to this and just ask, does anybody know what this is? Yeah, hands up, hands up. It's a bell curve which is used for performance management and performance reviews. I prefer to call it the bell curve of demotivation. And the reason for this is people managers are asked at pay review time, maybe it's once a year, maybe it's twice a year, to look at their team and say, are they non-performers? Are they average performers, or are they top performers? And they're told to make 10% of their people in the bottom bracket, 80%, these are examples, 80% in the middle bracket or 10% in the top bracket. And so the poor managers have to have that sort of conversation with their team members and work out for themselves where people fit. And they think, okay. They've got to balance the books and get it right. So they submit the information to the senior management team. And of course, HR will then say, there's more people in the top performers than you're allowed. There's more people in the middle band than you're allowed, and there's not enough people in the bottom band. The people in the bottom band don't get a pay rise, they don't get a bonus, and they may find themselves on a PIP, a performance improvement plan, which is quite a hard thing for people to have to go through. And it's a very difficult thing for line managers to actually deal with and administer. It's needed sometimes, but it's a thing to avoid if you can. So to get the right numbers, a process called moderation starts. I'm sure managers in the room know this, but not everybody will. And moderation is where the senior stakeholders and the senior management team will get together and they'll say, we've got to shave 20 people out of the top band and move them into the middle band. And they discuss the relative value and contribution that people in the teams are making. And the point here is that if you, as a manager, or if you as a tester, are not being able to demonstrate your value to that senior stakeholder group, you're not going to find yourself in the top 10%. And if you're in the middle, 80%, and the stakeholders don't know your value, and they don't understand your worth, you may find yourself being moved out of the middle bracket into the bottom bracket. And the reason I call it the bell curve of demotivation is because I have seen in a number of occasions where high performers don't get in a high-performing band. They quit the company to go somewhere where they think they're going to be valued. And I've also seen people who are reasonably average performers put into the bottom bracket. They quit. You then suddenly have a hole in your team because there's attrition. That creates additional work for the people that are left. That creates stress. That creates well-being problems. And that isn't healthy. And it also means you've got to spend a lot more money and time hiring people, which is more time-consuming. You start to see a spiral of deficit that comes up. I wouldn't call it technical debt, but it's kind of a similar thing in a people world. What that also then does, I'm just going to go back to the previous slide, this impacts on morale, well-being, and so that leads to attrition. But what that then does is it means that testing's reputation is being based on opinion rather than fact, and on subjectivity, where people are making their own mind up. And that can lead to a very toxic kind of working environment and a bad culture, where people are suffering, they're struggling, they're frustrated, and they lose the passion for their work. And nobody wants that. So I'm not painting a really bleak picture here, but this does happen. I just wanted to illustrate that if you don't have the right stakeholder engagement and demonstrate value, this is the kind of thing that can happen. Does that make sense? Good, good. Right, so the next thing, bias. As people who work with stakeholders, we all need to be aware that everyone has got experiences that influence their judgment. I'm not going to read the rather long thing about what a cognitive bias is, but I do want to talk a little bit about, I have to always look at this, non-adaptive choice switching. What that is is a bias which is more commonly known as once bitten, twice shy. The psychology of it is, if you've made a decision that has a bad outcome, you feel regret. And regret is a really powerful emotion, and we don't like it. Regret hurts. Regret is painful. So if, later on in your life, you are faced with the same decision to make, different circumstances, different solutions, but the logical and right answer is the same thing again, you're not going to do it. And I've got two examples of this just to kind of bring the topic to life. And the first one's really, really simple, and I'm sure everyone's had some experience of this, but I've worked in 3 companies where I've had conversations with either a CIO or a delivery manager or an agile Scrum Master, saying, how can we get software out the door more quickly? And you say, yeah, we can look at the processes, we can lean things out, we can deliver smaller chunks of value more quickly. But a lot of the answer comes back to automation. And in 3 companies I've worked in, people have tried automation and it failed. There was a significant investment in tooling, in licensing, in training, or bringing in suppliers to do that. Maybe investment in hardware to look after the automation packs and the code, and things became shelfware. And that return on investment didn't get realized. And so there was regret on that spend. So when the answer is automation the second time round, even if it's with a different framework or a different tool or a different supplier, sometimes the answer is no. And you can still do it. You do it under the covers and you prove a point and you go in with a little proof of concept and you say, oh, we've been working in the evenings and this is what we can do now that's different, that is better than last time. Now can we have the money? But it's still a problem where people remember bad experiences. Now, the second one is about free conference tickets. Who would like free conference tickets? Yeah? Oh, look at this. Tibor, everybody wants free conference tickets. I don't know what you do about that. There's feedback, though. So this next story, sorry, these are really rough slides. I apologize for the quality, but I had to take some screenshots of the video. I joined this company that was delivering software to the healthcare industry, and the testing team were fantastic. They grew their own people. We used to hire in interns from the kind of the biology sector, chemical sector, mathematical sector. And in their gap years, we'd give them a job, and they would get to know us, we would get to know them. They would learn how to do testing, and we would see whether we liked them working for us. And we used to convert them into testers once they'd graduated and give them a job. And they were great, and they were fantastic, and they were really good people. And you know what? If you want to hire people who understand testing, who are not testers, people from the science industry do know how this stuff works, because they test in labs. And so they're trained how to test in laboratories. And they understand the processes involved in testing and having samples and looking at variation. So if you need to hire people and you can't find any good people from the tech sector, have a look there. They're great. Anyway, I digress. We grew our own, and I wanted to broaden their horizons. And I wanted to take them to a testing conference. And there were 5 people in the team I particularly wanted to take. But I had no budget. So I wondered what we could do about it. And I suddenly found out the conference organizers had a competition on. And the competition was, if you could make a 2-minute video that showed your team being good at testing, that showed them finding defects, closing defects, having good governance and control about the release process, and showed teamwork, if you won the competition, they would put the video on the website. You'd get a lot of kudos and glory from that, and they'd give you 5 free tickets to the conference. And I thought, this is marvelous. Okay, so I went running off to my VP of engineering, and I explained what I'd like to do, which is to make this video in C. And he said, what a great idea. So I went back to the team, and I said, what about it, guys? Do we want to do this? And they were absolutely on it. They were working evenings, they were working weekends, they were storyboarding. They were working out the roles that different team members were going to play. They worked out how to represent defects. They worked out how to represent categorization within the life cycle. They worked out how to show governance and control and the release process being effective. And they also worked out how they would show teamwork. I can't show you the video they made because of IP and contractual obligations. I'd love to, but I can't. But these are the screenshots. So the defects were represented by children's plastic insects. At one point in the video, to show a deluge of defects, we actually had somebody on a stepladder pouring them out of a bucket onto people's heads and desks and into drawers. And it was mad. It was super funny and very tongue-in-cheek. But we then showed people gathering the defects up and categorizing them into new. Here's the life cycle, putting them in a tin. And testers moving the new defects to the developers to fix. And then when they were fixed, they were put across to the testers to retest. And so we were able to show frenetic activity of getting a release ready and getting the bugs removed from the system. We were then able to show a final test statement being prepared by a lead tester. Somebody else reviewed it and checked it against the testing tool. And then it was taken into the head of testing, some slimmer guy than I am now, who would then review that and rubber stamp it and say we've got a good release and it's safe to go. We thought it was a brilliant video. The team loved making it. It was a nice activity. Everybody got infused by it, and we were good to go. We submitted it. And I think it was the day before they were going to announce the result of the competition, I got a phone call from the organisers. And they said, we're not going to tell you that you've won, but we need to let you know that it's pretty close. I thought, okay, that's good. Because they wanted to give us advance warning that we might get a ticket so we could prepare travel and things like that. I was super excited. And it was about 7 o'clock in the evening. And I didn't let anybody know, but I kind of knew intellectually we'd got the prize. And I couldn't wait to tell the team in the morning. And I was staying at my mother-in-law's because I was having building work done, and we were having dinner, and my mobile went at about 7 o'clock. And I picked it up, and it was the head of marketing from the company I work for. And he said, I've heard something about a video that your team have made. I said, yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's going to give us good exposure. We're going to be able to demonstrate to industry how effective we are. We're going to be able to show people we've got a really good, professional, competent team. We're going to get a lot of kudos and a lot of good exposure out of this. And we're going to win free tickets to a conference. It's going to save us a couple of £1,000. And he said, I don't want you to release that video. I want you to withdraw it from the competition. I was gobsmacked. And I was absolutely disappointed because I knew the effort that my team had put into making this film. So we had a professional discussion about it, which took some time, and we couldn't agree on the outcome that we needed to achieve. So we called in my boss, the VP of engineering, who had said, this is a great idea, do it. And we had a three-way conversation for about another hour. The bloody head of marketing won. And we couldn't put the video in. We had to pull it out at the last minute. And I had to tell the team that it had been a waste of time. And everyone was super disappointed. The silver lining is the head of marketing gave us the budget from the marketing budget to go to the conference. So we got what we wanted, but it was a really bad outcome because of the demotivation and morale it had on the team. We had a great time at the conference. But what it taught me was I'd canvassed one stakeholder for their opinion, but not all the stakeholders. And the head of marketing had been bitten before, where customers didn't buy his software because there were bugs in the software. And he didn't want anyone thinking that our software would have defects in it. So even though it showed us finding them and removing them and there was governance, he just said no. Once bitten, twice shy. So being aware of bias and the influence it has on people is really, really important. Okay, so a kind of humorous story, but a bit sad as well. Now, it pays to know how stakeholders are feeling, but if you're not talking to them, you will get smoked signals. This is what I describe it. These are very similar to code smells if you're from a development background. And it's where people ask questions about the value or the cost or the efficiency or the effectiveness of testing. If you start to get those questions, and they come in indirectly, they come in from auditors, or they come in from delivery managers, or they come in from the CIO, or the project managers, or whatever, you know that there's a problem. And it's normally one of three things. It's normally, you've got a problem with testing and someone spotted it, or the stakeholders think there's a problem, but there isn't a problem, or it's a combination of the two. And it often is a combination of the two, to be fair. But the point I want to make here is that if those conversations are, or sorry, if those questions are being asked, you really need to own the conversation directly with the stakeholder. And there's two good reasons for it. The first one is it's really up to us to build the trust and the credibility with the stakeholders so that they come to us for the information in the first place, and we can start to build the trusting relationships that we need to avoid the problems. And the second thing is, in organizations, especially ones which are larger and there's quite an organizational hierarchy, when you send information up the food chain to more senior people, it often gets diluted. The integrity of the information you want them to receive can get changed because different people in that supply chain of information have got different agendas. It doesn't happen that often these days, but I have seen engineering managers get a test report from testing saying, we're going to be 2 weeks late because there's a lot of defects in the system, there's a lot of rework, it's going to cost more money, and we're not going to be able to deliver on time. And that gets changed into testing or blocking the release. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So having that ownership and that agency with the stakeholders to have the direct conversation means the messages that you want to land, whether they're positive or not, are delivered with the right integrity and with the right information to get the results that you need. So, what is the answer to this? If you haven't got a very good understanding of your stakeholders, it pays to spend some time doing an identification and a mapping exercise. Again, this is an illustration. This isn't real. But what I tend to do is I think about the stakeholders on two axes in a quadrant. And one is, who are the stakeholders that have the highest level of risk that we are operating on behalf of with our testing? And who are the stakeholders that have the highest level of exposure if we don't do our job well and the risks are realized? And by doing that, you can start to work out who are the stakeholders that we need in the top right-hand corner where there needs to be frequent engagement. They're the ones we need to talk to a lot and stay engaged with to make sure they understand what we're doing. Who are the ones that we need to keep satisfied? So we talk to them less often, but we still talk to them relatively frequently. Who are the ones we keep informed because they have an interest, but really it isn't that important? And who are the ones we don't ignore, but we have a limited engagement with? And it also pays when we're doing that activity to categorize them into different groups. So again, this isn't an instruction, but it helps to maybe put them into your technology stakeholders, people like the operations teams, your business stakeholders, your governance stakeholders. And you do that because although all stakeholders will have different needs and they will have different information they require, there will be commonality. And a lot of the data, of course, that you need to gain to share stories and narrative with them will come out of your tool sets. So it helps to understand where there's common data that's needed to send information to stakeholders so you can configure your tool sets in the right way before you start work. I've seen a lot of instances where testing teams are in an organization. This happened about a year ago, actually, when I was working in a consultancy and delivering services into a construction firm. We were doing all the normal things, showing pass failure rates, talking about bits of risk, talking about progress, highlighting areas in terms of development patterns that weren't good so we could help improve. But what we didn't know is that the CIO wanted information about how effective the development team were. What he wanted was information about rework. How much was it costing to fix defects? What was the cost of poor quality? how effective are the development teams? What could they be doing differently to prevent defects in the first place? Because he clearly had some bad experiences with his development partners that were doing the work. He didn't tell us that. And so halfway through the delivery, when things were going wrong, there was a sudden request for a whole heap of information that we could not provide without completely reconfiguring the tool sets to provide that data. And then, of course, we didn't have the historic data to provide him with the narrative. We could only tell him going forwards what it might look like on a day-to-day basis. And it wasn't good enough. So by doing the categorization and looking at the common patterns of information stakeholders need can save you a little bit of time. Right. So when it comes down to talking about value, I've got a couple of statements here I want to share with you. This first one is from a book that Paul JARRED wrote back in 2009. Paul was the program chair last year, and I love this book. It's called The Tester's Pocketbook, and it is a pocketbook. It's no bigger than your mobile phone, and it's no thicker than your mobile phone. It's got about 30 pages in it, but it's full of axioms, things that he believes are true that nobody can say is untrue. And one of the things he says about stakeholders is the value of testing is measured by the confidence of stakeholder decision-making. And if we believe that to be true, and I do believe that to be true, it then stands to reason that stakeholder confidence is directly related to the quality and the value of information that testers provide. So we need to think about what does quality and valuable information look like. Now, to help me explain this, I'd like to introduce this young man. This is Adi. He's my younger son. Adi loves bikes. He is a bike geek. He knows things like how many teeth are on his back hub, how many gears he's got. He knows his bike has got a drop seat saddle post or something. He knows what pressure his front forks need to be pumped up to be optimal on different bike tracks in different weather conditions. What he doesn't know about his bike and all bikes in the market, nobody knows. He's a geek. He wants everybody to be as interested in bikes as he is. And nobody is interested in what he has to say. And I don't blame them. And I was telling him, you need to give people information about bikes that's going to be meaningful to them. Things that they will understand the benefit of the bike. He went, what does that look like? And we were cycling one day in Wales where this photo was taken. And we came across a bike shop. And it had this shop window. And it actually says, the benefits of cycling. So, if you cycle, it shapes up your booty and your legs. Gives you a good figure. You can tell I don't do much cycling. You can whiz past traffic jams. Get to work quicker. It runs on fat, not fuel. Again, I don't do a lot of cycling. Zero emissions. It's good for the planet. It's faster than walking, which is true. You can have guiltless coffee and chimney cake. You can have as many of those chimney cakes as you want, and it won't matter if you do a good bike ride every day. Well, it probably will. But it reduces stress, it puts a big fat smile on the face. And if Adi talked to people about the benefits of cycling, they'd probably be more interested. And if we could get our stakeholders interested in our information, that'd be a good thing, right? So, poor old Adi. I was talking to him about 45 minutes ago, checking in at home. And I said, do you remember I'm talking about you in a conference? He goes, oh yeah, Dad, can you please tell him I've got a better bike now? I've now got a higher end with full suspension. I said, oh, there we go. So I rest my case. I rest my case. So I'm going to skip through a few slides here really rapidly. I just wanted to share with you, this is the sort of thing that you might want to share with stakeholders if you want to talk about valuable information with them. So by your technology stakeholders, your product owners and product managers are interested in things about the quality of the product. So this is fairly standard stuff. Have we met our acceptance criteria? Are we effective at testing? Quick feedback loops, how many defects are there? How testable is the software? The things that are qualitative about the product. Your third-party suppliers, the people who are going to be doing testing for you if you hire people in, care about that, but they care about the existing and to-be testing strategy that you might be implementing. They care about the processes and standards they need to operate and meet. They care about the test engagement protocols. Who do they need to engage with, and how is the work that they deliver going to be assured and governed? There's different information of value for different stakeholder groups within technology. The same, applies to the governance stakeholders. I'm not going to read it out. I'm just painting a picture here. The same applies to business stakeholders. They care about business proposition teams, so people who actually help to broker the budgets for large amounts of work of high value, particularly in private sector. They need to know, are the business processes being supported? They need to know whether value for money is being achieved in the expenditure to deliver good testing. And if I go back to my operational stakeholders in the financial services organization, what they needed to know was information about service availability. They needed to know about functional readiness of the software. They wanted to know what our risk-based testing strategies were so they could be confident we were doing the right kind of things before we got to service transition boards. They wanted to know about the scope of testing and the acceptance criteria achievement. I wanted them to know about test effectiveness. I wanted them to know how good we were. They also wanted to know about known issues and workarounds and value for money. So if I go back to this slide, I'll then explain how we started to turn around our stakeholders' perception of us. So if I go back to this and just kind of refresh your memory, they thought that we were incompetent. They thought we were doing exhaustive testing. They thought defect-free software was possible. And they accused us of being uncaring and working in isolation. So what we did about it was to start to use data to tell a story, to break some of these perceptions and tell a different narrative. And I did it using data and using a run chart. Now, does anybody know who Deming is? Right. I'm looking around the room. I have got a T-shirt. I like Deming so much, and I love two of his quotes. I love the quote that says, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." And he's right. I also like the other one, which is, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." I like it so much, I had a T-shirt printed for this keynote with the quote on it from Deming. It's too big. So if anybody wants this, they're welcome to have it. I'll just put it down the stage. I'm not going to reward it, but if anybody wants it, have it. If it doesn't fit, clean your car with it or something. But it's a nice T-shirt. It cost me 30 quid. Hey-ho. I'll learn to read the sizing chart online next time. What we did with data was to put information into a run chart. And, yeah, Sonia, it's all yours. Yay, well done. So we've all heard of defect leakage, yeah? It's where you work out how many defects you find before you release software into production, and then how many defects are found in production. And you express it either as a percentage or just a number. I knew that we were very good at testing, and we were very good at preventing defects hitting the production environment. So I took the defect leakage metrics and measures, and I flipped it round. So instead of talking about defect leakage, which is negative, I talked about test effectiveness, which was the prevention. And I could then show people how effective we were at testing and the levels of protection that we provided for the production environment. And this, again, illustrative data. Over time, you could see that you can show you have an average of about 99.4%. So you stop 99.4% of all defects in a system before production and only 0.6 leak. That starts to paint a different story. It starts to show people how good you are at what you do. It uses language which is positive rather than negative. The other thing that it did was it enabled us to have a conversation with our stakeholders. What would it cost us to close the gap? If we wanted to release defect-free software, how much more money, how much more time would it take to close that 0.6? And we knew how much it cost to fix defects and do rework. And we knew roughly how much money we were spending on testing. So we did some sums and it said, in order to close that gap, it might cost another £20,000 a week. And we said it's not economically viable. The bugs that you're having in production are not significant. They hurt you, they hurt us, but you can fix forwards and it's going to be okay. The question about risk appetite remained. They wanted to have they had a much lower risk appetite, and we had a much more pragmatic risk appetite, let's put it that way. So we couldn't agree. We agreed to disagree. And so to broker the conversation, I got the CIO involved. Because the CIO, we reported into him, so did operations. And I sat down with the CIO and I said, look, have you seen this? He said, what is it? I said, it shows how good we are at testing. He went, oh, how does that work? And I explained to him the calculations. And he said, so we are 99.4% effective at preventing defects. I said, yeah. Do you know what the average is for the industry? And he said, no, I don't have a clue. Now, at the time, I was quite into reading the World Quality Report, you know, the big sort of document that gets printed by Capgemini, Frank's team. And it was sort of saying about this stuff one year, and it showed that in average on financial services, it was about 96%. So I said, we're around 3% better than average. And he said, crikey, I'm going to go and tell the board. And he reported into a guy that was very senior in the financial services world, and that guy now actually runs the Bank of England. So he was dead excited and he had new information. And I said, operations want us to spend more money to close that gap. He goes, no, I'll tell them. They can stay where they are. And, you know, it was using data to tell a story and win a conversation over. And because we were doing that, we were showing the value of our work. We were showing that we weren't incompetent. But we were, hello? This isn't moving on. Can somebody on the tech desk move the slide forward, please? Thank you. So we were working in isolation. And this is me. This is how I felt. I was this little person in an office with my suit on going, sorry. We ran a thing called a test assurance board. And what the test assurance board was there to do was for us, as a kind of senior testing management team, weekly meet with our suppliers to find out what they were doing with testing, how testing was going, what the approaches were they were undertaking. We used it as a way of gaining information and also used it as a way of imparting knowledge to them about improvements to the service they could deliver. And it was very collegiate. It was very honest, and there was a lot of transparency. And it was a beautiful thing, because it wasn't governance and we weren't going to beat them up. We just wanted to get the right outcomes. And because we were doing this on a regular basis at different stages in the life cycle, we were able to find out if there were risks early on in the approaches. Now, that's what operations wanted to know. So it's very simple. We just said, why don't you come to our meetings? And they sent along, I can't remember her name, but a really, really nice lady. And after about a month, she said, I can see the work you do, and I can see you've got effective processes, and I love it. And she became very warm, well, warmish, as warm as operations get, to the testing team. And it started to feel like there's a bit of harmony in the room, which is fantastic. And because she was influential, the service transition managers started to calm down, which is fantastic. So we got the outcomes we wanted by using data, telling stories, and actually being a bit more transparent about our work so it was visible to the stakeholders that mattered. So moving on, because I'm nearly out of time, it's not easy. This is about winning hearts and minds. It's a bit like climate change. Even when you have got lots of data that provide leading indicators and tell a story, people still don't always believe. So it's not easy, and I'm not pretending it is. We do need to be aware of people's biases and how that can influence, and talk to them and get to know them and find out their history and their stories so that we can work with them in effective ways. Change management teams and business change teams can help with this. So if you're having difficulty with stakeholders, those sorts of guys and girls, if you've got them in your organizations, can be very helpful in helping an organization change the way it thinks. And if you engage with them, they can help you deliver that kind of transformation. And the other thing I've got here is about the use of advocates. Fiona Childs and I were talking about this last year. And influence and power in an organization doesn't always follow the organization chart. And so it really pays to network and understand who has got whose ear. And it could be quite likely that, I don't know, an enterprise architect plays golf with the CIO, and he's an advocate of testing. So you use your advocates to send the messages and get the conversation started. So networking is important for people in testing if you want to have good reach in an organization. And finally, just to summarize, I'm just going to tell you again, stakeholders are really important. You know, we need them. We don't exist without them. We need to know what their needs are. We need to know how to communicate with them. We need to be able to demonstrate the benefit of our work. It makes our lives easier. Okay. We need to be able to use data to tell the story, support your narrative. Because, as Deming says, if you don't do that, it's an opinion. And we're trying to remove subjectivity and opinion from the conversation. And ensure that your testing is aligned with your stakeholder needs. And if you do it, that will help build confidence, trust, and credibility. And I'm out of time, but I'm on time. So I'm open for questions. There you go.
Thank you so much, Mike, for the presentation. We still have a few more questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What would be a good strategy to change a negative stakeholder's perspective to a positive one?
What I just told you.
Okay.
The strategy is to, first of all, identify what they need from you, identify what their risks are or what their needs are from you and the service that you provide, and start to understand why the work you do is valuable to them, and ask them how you can provide information that they recognize that value. It can be difficult, and part of the strategy, I guess, is actually knowing who to speak to in the first place. And one thing I found quite helpful is to look at company risk registers. Now, you may not have access to them directly, but if your manager has got access to a risk register, ask him to see if you can have a look. And it will show all the stuff in red and who the owners are. And if there are risks around technology adoption, if there are risks around cost, if there are risks around market penetration because of speed, you can look at that and say, we've got some solutions here in testing and how we work that could actually be beneficial to those guys. I might go and have a chat with them, see if I can have a meeting, and start a conversation about things that we can do to show them how valuable we are and how we are protecting their interests. So maybe using risk registers is one way of actually getting that identification started. Does that make sense? Whoever asked the question.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Best for last indeed. This is how it starts. So the question is, what strategies or approaches have you found effective in improving stakeholder engagement and communication?
We just did that one. That was the question.
Wasn't it changing it from negative to positive? So this is a new one.
Is it a name? It sounds very similar. But yeah, I mean, so the marketing of information is important. So that's a good point. You know, if you've got information that you're sending and all you're talking about are things that people find about as being negative, like defects. Defects are negative, aren't they? Defects are things that prevent releases. Defects are things that people have to work on. Defects are things that makes developers work late into the evening sometimes. And what you can do is actually say, well, we've got this information about defects. If we can talk about how much money it costs to fix defects and how much the rework is, and say we could prevent those by doing these things, you can start to talk about the prevention of defects and the cost benefit of that activity. And that turns it into a positive conversation about financial value. So the marketing of information and turning negative messages into positive ones is probably a good thing to do.
Okay, moving on. A great stakeholder is able to hold stake in both hands and an apology.
I think it's a good joke.
Yeah, it is a good one. Testing, yeah, big applause. That was really good. No? Okay, fine, cool. Okay,
fair joke.
Thanks for the big one. Testing could have stakeholders from different levels of the company. How do you fulfill each expectation, and should you?
Okay, so this goes back a little bit to the stakeholder mapping. It's a great thing if you, okay, the slides are gone. Remember the grid that showed the quadrants and the ones you need to engage frequently with and the ones you can just talk to occasionally. If you do that exercise, you start to identify the ones that you need to reach first. And you can't talk to all of the stakeholders, but you need to talk to the important ones. So doing that identification piece and that mapping piece will show you where you need to spend your effort. Yeah.
All right. What risks do you see when low performers are not handled accordingly and kept in the middle performance bucket?
Oh, right. OK, so that's the inverse. Team dissatisfaction. Teams will get teams of people, particularly now with agile teams and DevOps teams, where you've got small teams of people, low performers are quickly spotted. And so if you've got low performers who are in the middle bracket, and other team members see there's nothing being done to address their performance, that will cause dissatisfaction. And so that's where you start to get people who are perhaps isolated, they're not included, they're not respected. And that's tough for the person who's in the wrong bracket, but it's also unfair on the other team members who are doing well and are actually working quite well. So that does need to get addressed. Yeah.
All right, let's have one more. The one that's on top is, okay, you can choose now, right? Because the one on top is how do you measure value? But now the second one, do you have a personal experience about getting bitten once and be twice shy about it? How to move on? Choose the one you want to answer.
Yeah, right. So, well, not a funny story, but a true story. But you might find it funny. My son, who loves mountain biking, we don't have masses in common, but I do quite like getting on a bike occasionally. But because he's really good at mountain biking and he goes on the black runs, he's a bit of a daredevil. I don't tend to go on those runs because I'm not fit enough and I'm not actually very bouncy anymore. And I went on a ride with him, and within 5 minutes of riding on this run, I came off and I broke my ribs. And this was about a year ago. I don't do as much mountain biking anymore. I know I should do, for my relationship with my son and for my health, but once bitten, twice shy, I'm less inclined to get on my bike and injure myself again.
Please do not. And thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike JARRED with his great keynote.
Thank you.